Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our latest live webinar on the future of storage. My name is Jeff Borland. I'm the Managing Director of Evolution Systems. I'm sitting in for Daniel Fleetwood, who cannot be with us this morning as his fiancée Lara is in hospital right now, expecting the arrival of their first child. So we send our best wishes to Lara and Daniel. I'm delighted to introduce our two guests today. We have not one, but two subject matter experts in their field. Before I do that, I would just like to have a quick shout out and say hello to everybody watching this morning on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and anywhere else you might be watching in the big wide world. And also today we are live, so please feel free to pop your questions in the chat and we'll get to answer them at the end when we get some time for a Q&A. So first of all, I would like to introduce you to Richard Austin, Outback Austin. For over a decade, Richard has worked diligently across the globe, helping organizations to secure their data from user error, natural disasters, and now cyber threats. Richard is he's a renowned as a subject matter expert across the IBM Flash and IBM Spectrum software portfolio. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Jeff.
And Rick Terry. Rick has been working with IBM Storage now for over 15 years and has worked with some of the largest organizations within Australia, including ANZ, NAB, Telstra, and Australia Post. Rick is passionate about IBM Spectrum Storage Suite and is very active within the ecosystem. So good morning, Rick.
Morning, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
That's a pleasure. Great to have you on this morning, guys. So today we're going to focus on three of the latest enhancements with IBM Storage. We're going to talk about the 3 C's. So we're going to talk about cyber resiliency. We're going to talk about cloud backups. And we're also going to talk about containers. So let's get straight into it, shall we? Let's talk about, oh, hang on a sec. Let me just share my screen. Let's get rid of that. So, Richard, what is so important about cyber resiliency?
Well, we kind of have to take a little bit of a step back before we take a little bit of a step forward. So organizations traditionally put infrastructure together based on availability of data and availability of online services. So we might talk about high availability, providing users access to the systems irrespective of challenges. So whether that be natural disaster or something like that. We also did something around, we'd look at data backups, so for an insurance policy. But the problem is, or the challenge is that the threats from organizations have moved forwards and have moved on. And actually, COVID hasn't really helped. It's actually accelerated in some ways what happens and how external infiltrators look to make money. Yeah, and cyber threats come in from a variety of sources, and the aim is to hold an organization accountable, right? So to freeze data, to hold data, to stop systems working, right? And we've seen that across the globe, right? We've seen that with many different organizations, right? And that malware or that infiltration can be quiet and kept quiet for a significant amount of time. It doesn't just happen. So like when we have a natural disaster, right, we know straight away that there's a problem, right? We know that snow has melted and leaked into a data center, right? The water, right? We know there's been a flood. We know there's a storm front coming. We know COVID, it's a known entity, but with cyber attacks, it's not a known entity. We don't know when or where it's going to happen, and therefore it becomes very difficult to recover from a cyber breach, right? And it says here 23 days is the average recovery from a ransomware attack. And why it's so important now is it's not just organized crime, right, that's looking to seek money out of organizations. There's actually people who are looking to destroy organizations' data. And I'm not just talking about disgruntled employees, right? I'm talking about people that want to destroy the data, right? Same kind of person who's going to kick the wheels of your bike locked up outside, right? They don't care, right? It's off of them, right? And so the reason it's important to be cyber resilient is because you need to maintain operations and you need to be able to recover, not if, but when there may be an infiltration.
Yeah, Richard, I think it's a good point that everybody should realise. You raised about how COVID and everything has exacerbated it. All of us are working in a much more dynamic environment than previously. A lot more people are working from home, which is giving a lot of unprotected endpoints. And phishing is getting more sophisticated. People have to be much more aware because they're not necessarily behind the company firewall the whole time, but they're on their company device. So we all have to have a much more heightened awareness of the attacks that may be going on.
Yeah, I just looking at that slide, one thing that really stands out for me is 83% of ransomware victims actually pay their attackers. I just find that astounding. What do you feel is the reasoning for that? Why are 83% of ransomware victims actually paying their attackers?
And because they don't have a recovery plan, they don't have a way out. They've been backed into a corner, and if they don't, the real challenge is, or the real problem is, if they don't pay the ransomware, they go out of business. So it's cheaper to pay the ransomware than it is to go out of business.
I was reading a statistic the other day. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a frighteningly large number of organizations that once they pay the ransomware, they're getting like 60% of their data back. They're not actually getting all of their data back either. So again, I think it's vital that you can have that recovery point.
Well, who's defining the rules of the relationship here, right? It's clearly not the organizations. It's clearly the external attackers.
Absolutely. And not to mention as well, you've then got those knock-on effects, such as a reputational damage, and recovering from an incident like that can be very damaging long term.
Well, the Travelex thing, a lot of banks' credit cards, bank accounts, and things like that are all on currency exchanges. Are all linked to Travelex. So Travelex goes down. It doesn't just affect the direct Travelex clients or customers. You might say, well, I see Travelex when I go into an airport or in a city street or anything like that. There's a knock-on effect to all the business-to-business connections and connectivity, right? So now businesses that have an indirect link or association with Travelex are having challenges getting customers their data or exchanging the money that their customers want on their credit card.
Yeah.
And you're right, Jeff, about that reputational damage. There was a situation recently with the UK Labour Party where they had some of their data that was being hosted for them by a web service provider who then got held to ransom, and that actually had a great impact upon the Labour Party's reputation, even though it wasn't them that was directly being attacked by the ransomware company.
Yeah, that's interesting. And here's another frightening statistic for you. On average, a hacker spends 280 days in an organization's infrastructure prior to the attack. That's again quite frightening. It's pretty much almost a year.
We go back to that traditional way of thinking about recoverability and availability of our systems, of our databases, or web pages, of our apps, right? But there's not a leak dripping for 280 days before we realize the data center's flooded. Yeah, it's that silent, it's that unknown, it's finding something in the shadows.
And they've had an opportunity to poison your backups at that point, not just your production data. And in fact, history has shown that the first thing they will do is attack your backups and encrypt those so you have nowhere to go, and then they'll attack your production. And so that really is an important thing to bear in mind.
So how does Cyber Vault actually help then in providing that, irrefutable sort of backup? You mentioned there, Rick, that the attackers will attack the backups first, which obviously is a strategy now. So how does Cyber Vault help?
Okay, so if you can progress to the next slide first, Jeff, we'll be able to see a visual representation of how Cyber Vault and Cyber Resiliency helps our organizations and our customers as well. So we have to remember that within an IBM flash system, or in specifically our Spectrum virtualized code, which of course runs across the majority of our IBM storage portfolio, right? We have the ability to take these things called safeguarded copies. And you think, well, what's a safeguarded copy? Sounds safe, right? Well, it's a mutable copy of the data. And what does immutable mean? Well, it means that data can't be tampered once it's created or once it's copied, right? So now we're fighting back, right? Yeah, so we've got copies of our data, right, which can't be changed. Yeah, so it doesn't matter so much about the cyber threat. I mean, cyber threat's still going to happen, and then cyber attack's still going to happen. But now we've got the option to recover data that can't be changed. So we'll go back to Rick's point. Right, they first attack the backup, right? Yeah. Well, what happens if we've got copies of data that's immutable? Or if we go a long way back in time, and we talk about tape, we talk about worm, right? Anyone remember worm tape? Yeah. Right. Once, read many. Anyone remember a CD that we burnt with data and then it couldn't be changed again? Right, once you've burnt that CD or that DVD or whatever it is, you can't change it, right? And that's the same with our safeguarded copy and our Cyber Vault solution, right? So we're giving our clients the ability to recover copies of data that haven't been changed or can't be changed once they've been created, right? So we look through our different copies of the data, and then we can recover which one that we need, right, when we need it. So we create like this recovery environment. Now we can use things like Ansible, we can use external tools, we can do playbooks, right? So we can start to work through the automation of the recovery of specific data points or specific points in time, right? So of course you build a vault, you have a testing process, and you may put some automation in there. So you're speeding up your recovery point. And it's the Cyber Vault solution, think of it as a blueprint, right? Utilizing specific capabilities with specific capabilities in our storage portfolio.
And we saw earlier the average time to recover from an attack. So with something like Cyber Vault in play, what's the sort of average recovery time are we seeing once an attack has sort of been identified?
So it's not if, right? It's when. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to shorten that recovery period from that long period of time. So we're taking it from days, right, to hours in terms of recovery, getting the data back to the application owners in the fastest possible time. And we're not doing a recovery of the data as in a backup type. We're not pulling the data from somewhere else. We're recovering it from the live production systems, if you like, the live underlying storage layer. So it's a bang. Once you've worked out what you want to get back, bang, you get the data back.
Yeah, the great thing is, Richard, you're quite right that you're storing these immutable copies, but on your production system, but in a way that they are invisible to anybody else in the organization. Nobody can tamper with them until the time comes that you need to restore them. Then you have to restore them somewhere else, so that you've still got the immutable copy as you're then taking that restoration copy, and then you can work with it to see and test that that's okay. So it really does means you're working flash to flash these days. So you're working much quicker than going back and trying to find files and restore them from backup copies that may even be offsite and maybe in Iron Mountain or somewhere. So you don't have to worry about that. This is coming from your production environment.
Yeah, that's vital. Now, I also see on the chart there that IBM do have a free assessment in order to help people understand where they're currently at. So I'll put the link there on the screen. That is a 2-hour assessment where IBM will come in and provide you with a report of the current status of your environment. So this is a really important first step, I believe, in sort of protecting yourselves. As Richard, you just mentioned, it's not a question of when. It's a question. Sorry, it's not a question of if. It's a question of when.
Yeah. So if you can move forward to the next slide, I think, as I understand it, we've got we've got an overview of the capabilities of our cyber resiliency assessment. Right, so there's two assessments we've got a free assessment, and then we've got one where we involve our IBM lab services in order to provide a more detailed understanding of what's going on in the organization. So you've got, at the moment, you've got a screen that's showing the IBM Cyber Vault capabilities.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so so we've got the CRATs, and then we got the CIRS offering as well, right? So this is about understanding an organization's infrastructure, right? But also their processes as well. Right? We don't need to go into too many, but it's about understanding, if there's a challenge, if there's a breach, if something goes wrong, then how do we actually recover the data? How do you get the systems back online, right? If you're an organization that's using, let's say, Outlook, and that's attacked, right, then what other tools can you use for communication purposes? And it might be that you haven't got other tools to use for communication purposes, like Slack and Teams and other things like that knocking around, right? So what, for a given organization, right, are their critical systems, right? So for some, it might be email. For some, it might be a specific web server. It might be order processing. For manufacturing, it might be something to do with a manufacturing process, right? Different organizations have different priorities, and it's about understanding how those different processes, how those different use of applications actually affects their business. And if you are caught by the short and curlies, right, then what can you do in order to untangle yourself?
Yeah. Okay. That's good. But we could probably talk about this topic, I would say, for quite some time.
What I will say there, right, is CRAT assessments are free, don't cost anything. So I'm an IBMer, and I'm saying a cyber resiliency assessment, the CRAT is free.
Did you say free?
Do you know what, Jeff? I might have said free. There's an echo knocking around.
I think more important than it being free, I think it's something that you can do very quickly, and it's just a snapshot to say, are you well protected, or are there holes? And if there are holes, then we can talk about how you can patch them. And I think it's more important, therefore, because it's free, you can deploy it very quickly. You haven't got to go ask for somebody for some money to get something funded. Let's find out. Let's help our clients. Let's help our viewers to understand where they are at any point in time, and therefore what they might need to do to address any holes that they may have in their systems.
Yeah, look, I think that's incredibly valuable, and the fact that it's also free and you've got that assessment, you're better off knowing where your holes are so that you can actually plug them, as opposed to just being ignorant to them and hoping nothing happens. All right, guys, let's move on. Let's have a little chat about Spectrum Protect Plus for online services. This product really excites me. The main reason it excites me is because we mentioned earlier on, people are a lot more working from home over the last couple of years. A lot of information has gone online in that time, and this particular product is a bit of a game changer. I think there's a real myth in moving to cloud applications that your data is going to be protected and backed up and readily restorable. So it's not quite the case. So what is it about Spectrum Protect Plus for online services that can actually help in that area?
So, like you said, a lot of organisations have looked to SaaS providers. It's taking a software as a service is a lot easier because you don't have to manage your own infrastructure, right? But same as if you were managing your own infrastructure, you might have RAID on your disks, you might have availability between your servers, so data replication, things like that. And that's about availability. So when we talk about SaaS, generally we're talking about availability of data. It doesn't necessarily mean that we've got a copy of that data, right? It doesn't mean that we've got a backup or we've got an insurance policy against that data. So traditionally, those that are providing SaaS solutions will store data for a certain amount or certain amount of time, right? But it's not longevity of data, or it's not a copy elsewhere. So if your mail system was, for example, Azure was to become unavailable or offline, how would you access your mail items? Well, it may become very, very difficult. So wouldn't it be great if you could have access, or you could have a copy of that data stored elsewhere? And that's the beauty of Spectrum Protect Plus for online services, right? And and today we're doing things around Azure and Outlook, but going forward, you're going to have Salesforce and other popular SaaS-based applications. So, as this article from Forrester points out, there's no backup included. So you delete a file out of Outlook, it's gone. You might be in your deleted items, but once it's 30 days and it's gone. So let's just say a disgruntled employee deletes a load of data. Yeah, we go back to our cyber threat, external threat, bad actors perspective. There's no way to get that data back. Right? If you need those emails, if you need those attachments, because not everybody saves all their attachments where they should be saved, right? For regulatory reasons or another reason, right? Where'd you go? You're in a bit of a pickle, aren't you? Right. So if you can just go forward to the next slide. Microsoft themselves, so you can go and look this up, right, in their services agreement, right? But they say we recommend that you regularly back up your content and your data, right? So the vendor that's providing the application is saying to you, hidden in those terms and conditions, actually, we encourage you to back up your data, right? And traditionally, we've backed up data for as long as data's been available. We have a copy of the data, we have an archive, whatever terminology you want to use, there's a second copy of the data somewhere that's kept for a longevity it's an insurance policy at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, if you think about how we all work now, Microsoft Teams as an example is a great way of actually uploading files and working on files collaboratively with people. I'm just wondering how much data is sitting there inside Microsoft Teams, for example, that isn't even being backed up, not to mention, your Outlook and your traditional sort of applications.
Yeah, so you go, do you remember that Teams meeting we had and we put that document together? Or there was that outcome? Any ideas where that file went? Didn't we take one out and we replace another one? Yeah, but we want the one from before. Yeah.
I think this fundamentally what we have to remember is that a cloud provided service is just your data center being managed by someone somewhere else, and so it's not a matter of, you can't divorce yourself from that whole responsibility by saying that's their fault or that's their problem, because if the data's not there, it's not their problem, it's your problem. The other thing to bear in mind is we talk an awful lot about these online services, assuming that they're always going to be, well, Microsoft's always going to be up, isn't it? Google will always be available. Well, actually, they're not. And so we need to bear that in mind, as to part of our disaster recovery planning, that these things aren't necessarily going to be always available. What happens if you fall out with your cloud service provider and you want to go to another one? Well, they've got all your data unless you've got a copy of it as well.
Yeah, and they don't generally make it easy either, do they, to get that data sometimes?
Can be a problem. Or sometimes, I mean, there was a company in Europe, OVH, whose recently their data center unfortunately burnt down, and some of their customers said to them, "Well, can we? What about the backup copies?" And they said, "Well, you didn't pay for backup copies." And people had naturally assumed, because it was in a cloud, in a service provider, that there was going to be a backup. Well, no, the service provider is providing the online service. The backup is an additional element, just like seatbelts used to be in cars years ago, and spare tires used to be. Then the same with these things, you have to pay extra.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, we see that. I mean, no backup is the same for more than one customer. Everyone has different backup requirements. Everyone has different retention requirements, different legislative requirements. So it is a big area. And like I said earlier on, I think there is that myth that the backup, or sorry, the cloud provider will look after all of that for you, but it's not always the case.
The old rules of 3-2-1, 3 copies of your data, 2 different media types, and one of them at least off-site still applies. If you're working in the cloud, then maybe off-site is your site. Maybe you're going to actually keep a copy of your own data in your own data center and not in the cloud service provider.
Yeah. And the good thing with this, I've seen as well, that you can actually even recover right down to an individual email. You don't have to restore the whole shooting match. You can actually drill right down into a specific element.
Yeah. So Jeff, if you go to the next slide, so you know, we've been recovering individual mail items or permissions for a very long period of time, right? So you could say we're established. When I came into IBM, it was the days of FilesX and Fastback. Does anyone remember that, right? And back then we were doing individual mail item recoveries, not just to the existing user, but to another user, right? Or to many users. So say you're investigating someone in your organization with all the mail items, well, you have different authorities, don't you? So you just claim their mailbox, basically. Right? So we've been doing this for a long period of time. So you would expect, and it's status quo, so to speak, that we can provide those recovery services, right, using a platform such as Spectrum Protect Online Services, right? So we can provide those recovery options. And I want to go back to kind of Rick's point, one of Rick's points, actually, right? So you can have like a logical air gap, or you can have a logical partition between where you store your data and where your backup copy of your data is. So within Azure, so you can have many different private instances, let's say, and logical separation of data within data centers, right? Right, because we've been doing that for 10, 15 years, right? Easy, right, and beyond. But also you might want a physical air gap as well. So you might want it in a completely different geography, or you may want it on a completely different platform as well. So do you want to be completely tied to a single cloud provider or a single vendor's cloud provider, or do you want the flexibility to have your data elsewhere, right? If we go back to ransomware and the knock-on effect of someone else being held accountable or being held to ransom, then maybe it's a good idea not to have all your eggs in one basket. Maybe we need some of those eggs elsewhere, just because if we drop our basket or our basket becomes availability, we can still make our, I don't know, poached scrambled eggs. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but those eggs are still available, right, for consumption, right, preferably cooked as well. But we've got the ability to then do recovery from a different service provider, from a different cloud provider, and even on-premise as well. So if you're a traditional organization who's got a mix or a blend of applications in the cloud, right, and on-premise, right, so we could call that hybrid, or across different cloud providers, then we've got solutions here that can offer you insurance policies for your data, right, for your data in Outlook, for your data in applications such as Word, which is stored in OneDrive, in Teams, etc., right, and gives you full control of your entire data platform end to end.
Yeah, it's vitally important. I mean, and the good thing, this product is licensed per user also, with no requirement to actually own your own hardware.
That's correct. So you can have it in a cloud per user, so it aligns to Microsoft licensing as well. So there's no complex licensing, right? It's very, very simple per user licensing, and therefore it's manageable as well.
And from my perspective, as I mentioned earlier, as an MSP, this gives us a reason now to go and knock on the door of any organization really, and to talk to them about how they're managing their their cloud applications and backups. It's and there's a big roadmap for this, Richard, as well. I saw that you mentioned earlier they're bringing Salesforce on board, and I'm assuming there'll be other applications coming as well.
There'll be other applications as well. Now, Jeff, I just want to pivot a little bit because we've got Rick sat here, right? And we've got a third topic, and we're slightly overrunning. And this is just an introduction to some of these capabilities. I'd really like Rick to speak just briefly about our new capability around accelerating the use of containers on-premise.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so interestingly enough, more than half of the world's large businesses are already using Red Hat OpenShift for their Kubernetes workloads. And what IBM has done is now launched this new product called Spectrum Fusion. Spectrum Fusion is giving the capability of providing your underlying storage in a consumable way to that container world. Containers came about as a lightweight way of being able to separate the way that you work your different systems, being able to modularize the way you work. But a lot of that in the initial days was in very stateful environments where data didn't necessarily need to be persistent. We're going to spin this up, we're going to work with it, and then we're going to spin it down, throw it away, and start again. And that was the great beauty of containers. You can spin things up very quickly. The point is that as they've moved into the mainstream, it's necessary for that data to be resident, to be consistent. After you've finished using that container, you're going to spin up a different container, different workload, but you're still going to want to work on the same data. So what Spectrum Fusion does is it allows you to set up a consistent environment for those stable container workloads of the data, and it works very closely with the OpenShift. Now, there are two different variants of this. One here you'll see is one that the fastest way to do it is to use what you've already got. So we have a software-defined, software-only version. The great advantage of that is you can start deploying it straight away in your particular environment. If you've got an OpenShift and you've got some VMware, away you go. That's great. But those who want to get the maximum efficiency out of the environment, then IBM has gone down the converged infrastructure route. So in other words, you can buy this as a shrink-wrapped product from IBM that's going to give you all of that turnkey capability as efficiently as possible. But clearly that's going to take some while for us to work with you to make sure that that box fits exactly what your requirements are. Either way, this is giving flexibility for the future for giving that persistent data for containers. Now, containers may not be what is everybody's flavor at the moment, but I know there are some stats that we shared earlier, Jeff, the numbers of Fortune 500 companies who are using this kind of technology. 85% of the government and military businesses in that Fortune 500 kind of arena are using an OpenShift environment. If you take that to some of the others, the logistics and transportation, 57%. You'll notice all of these are well over 50%. The important thing is to understand what the big guys do today, the rest of us do tomorrow. And so containers are coming. Containers are going to be the way that we all work in the future. I am long enough, and I do have enough grey hair to remember the time before VMware. And so when VMware came along, well, this was a new thing, and it then became the point that everybody's using it. And it's going to be exactly the same with containers, that we're all going to be using containers in the future. But if we're going to be doing that, then we need to have that persistent access to our data. We need to be able to access it no matter what containers are accessing it, and whether those containers have been created, thrown away, and some new ones created, the underlying data still needs to be available. The great thing is this interacts with IBM's suite of Spectrum products. So it includes a backup package. It includes the Spectrum Protect Plus to be able to back it up. So we've got a file system here. We've got backup here, all around your consistent data that's going to go into your container environment. So it's we've mentioned this here really because it gives us that third C. We've talked about cyber resiliency and how important that is today, right now, and get one of those resiliency studies done. We've talked a little bit about cloud backup, how that's today, and it's going to be something you need to think about. And Jeff has kindly offered for his business to be able to talk to anybody about this because it's important. What we're saying here with the containers, yes, they are here, they are today. 50% of the large organizations in the world, or more than 50% of the large organizations in the world, are running their Kubernetes container workloads on OpenShift. What we're saying is if they want to have access to persistent data, this is the route to do it down. But understand this is going to be something that comes to everybody. So I just wanted to round that off. So thanks, Richard, for giving me that opportunity. And Jeff, thank you for the time today. We've appreciated.
Absolutely. It's great having you guys on, and I think we mentioned before, this really is a taster for the topics that we've been talking about. There's a lot of information that is under the covers within these discussions, and we could probably talk for hours on this, but we do have a bit of a time constraint, unfortunately, today. Rick, this is a bit of a busy slide, but it does give you, I guess, I
think it highlights the important things. You've got to have Red Hat OpenShift running your containers. That's why it's bright red, and you can see that. What we're saying is below that, the Spectrum Fusion is going to give you all of the storage-related services that you need to support that Kubernetes environment. Those are the 2 points I'd take out of this very busy slide, as you say.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. So guys, just before I said we finish up, is there any final thoughts that we want to just cover off today?
I'd say if I'll wrap up first, it's very important in this day and age to work with a business partner like Evolution Systems. IBM is IBM. It's a behemoth. It moves at a slow pace sometimes. Your local service providers can move much more with much more agility. And they are pulling together not just the elements that IBM provides, but other elements that are necessary to give a solution. And so that's very important. And we're glad that we've been able to platform our parts today, but we're really glad to be able to partner with Evolution because they help to pull those together in a solution for clients. So thanks, Jeff, for today.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. That's nice, and yeah, we've been a business partner with IBM now for 22 years, so we've seen a lot of change in that time, and certainly now more than ever, we've seen IBM engaging more and more through the channel, and we're seeing that coming through very strongly these days. So, so just on that, I mean, what was clear to me today is we've seen how IBM technology can help keep businesses safe in today's online world, and how IBM can help businesses innovate with application modernization with Red Hat OpenShift. We could talk a lot longer than we've had, but what I would just say to people is that if you'd like to know more about these topics or anything else that we've spoken about, feel free to reach out to us on our website. There's a link there for our Contact Us page. And I want to say a big thank you to Rick and Richard for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on today, and I will look forward to catching up with you both shortly. And a big thank you to everybody watching too, and I hope you got a lot out of today. Awesome. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Jeff.
See you soon. Bye-bye.